I
geez.
thought that there should be some level of understanding of invasive species on the part of this person. Because although the first item talks about environmental and natural resource protection, it's not specifically invasive species work. Now, they don't have to be part of having, done that kind of work, but at least to understand what resources are already available and what we may need to assist the state or federal government with.
I think that's a great suggestion. How would we like to word that? Or does anybody else have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I chime in. In addition to invasive species, there's a whole side of agriculture that involves pests and problems and fungus and mold, and so they've got to know something about that side. It's one thing to know how to grow. It's also one thing how to prevent. So you want to have both sides of that.
So invasive species, pests, and threats, yeah? So Kenneth, as we're talking about that, and Gary, would you like them to just be educated about those topics, or should they have experience in the field, or what are we thinking?
I think you need to at least understand the main threats. Like right now, the the coffee has the disease that can wipe the industry out. So I'm just saying, whatever is really currently on the, as an issue, I think you need to be aware of it, that it's a high priority. Because, every year something, either insect or disease becomes like a high priority item. I mean, almost every year is different depending on the weather. And so but you have to be aware of what is the current issues so that you can direct some additional effort into that specific problem. It's the moving target.
Very much so, and even the weather can be a challenge. So, I think the key is they need to have awareness, but they need to know how to prioritize and create something that's an urgent or almost emergency. Be able to put task force together and jump on things. That you've got to know what the urgency is, because some of these things can take over overnight. So. They've got to have some education, some awareness, some experience would be useful. But we also need to know that it's a Hawaii and Maui experience that's going to be the flavor that makes a difference.
So would we like to maybe add it to down here of the preparing, prioritizing, recommending revisions of long-range general plans, and do like an invasive species, pest and threats management plan? Or do we want to do a new section of just like, applicants should have awareness of these things and include that in that section?
I think it raises to the level of the first that you said. I wouldn't necessarily list out all that stuff. You might put it in an appendix or something, but threats and challenges are going to be 80% of the job.
Yeah.
I just
Anybody?
say, I just was just going to make a point too, that overall, when you're looking at the job description, there's what the person, what knowledge the person brings to it, and then what the scope of their what they're dealing with in their day-to-day when they get there. So they could possibly not have any knowledge about invasive species, but understand that once they get to the job, that they're going to have to learn about it and address those issues. So I think some of that, obviously that's super, super important. But what I'm saying is overall, you have kind of what the person is bringing to the job when they first get there, and then what the expectation that they learn while they're there. Do you know what I'm saying? So there might be something to do with just how you frame some of this.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be, you're going to get 60% of something, and the person's going to have to round it out either by hiring people or learning more or something. But somehow or another, we're going to have to get to 100% of all this. So Shay is exactly right.
Mhm.
The way I was seeing this category, Jennifer, includes someone that knows how to research solutions. So a lot of other communities around the world have dealt with similar problems or problems of different types, but the same impact. And so having someone that has the skills to research, network, and communicate what has been done, what works, I think that's really powerful in this day and age. And that seems to fit with what Shay was saying, that we can't expect them to know everything, but we do want somebody that's really has a demonstrated ability to find answers and solutions.
And be able to adapt them, because you find a solution for in China that is going to be again, it's kind of an 80% solution. We're going to have to figure out how to make it work here. So yeah, they have to research multiple ways.
So in that sense, could we put it under the must maybe with, research and development in areas such as, and then list some areas like this so that we know that they have that capability? Sorry, I cut somebody off. I apologize.
I think they should. This is Jerry, by the way.
Hi, Jerry.
On Palehu Road, heading back home. But anyways, I get a little nervous if we start becoming much too specific in terms of what the qualifications are, because we'll start to ace people out. So if we could, say that it would be expected, or it would be desirable if someone had experience with dealing with invasive species and pests, but that they should expect that this comes with the territory of the job, rather than making it a requirement they have X number of years biology training.
All right, Jerry, your phone was cutting out there. I think the dilemma we have here is walking the tightrope of what the department needs to do and what the director and the deputy director need to do. And what are the core things? And again, I agree with Jerry in terms of we don't want to be so specific that it's just the resume is a checkoff item. But the key is how are you going to serve the function of the Department of Agriculture? What do you bring to the table, as Shay said, and how are you going to round it out and fulfill all the requirements that the department needs to do?
So I'm going to try and type out something, and we can kind of wordsmith it and see if that's something we want to go with or change.
think you could go one step further and put something in where they need to be willing to collaborate and find experts in those areas. Because I wouldn't expect this person to be able to understand everything about different dynamics of plant biology in all these respective areas. But I would expect them to be able to find people who have solutions and collaborate with those people who do in those areas, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Does that imply we need an advisory board or something that he can rely on? He or she, sorry, that doesn't mean the director can rely on?
That's kind of how I perceive this. A lot of times I'll get phone calls from representatives or senators who, and I'm happy to receive them because they'll ask questions about certain things that they don't know about, right? And I think that's really important that we don't have someone in this position that, rather than finding the area experts of those areas and making decisions shooting from the hip without finding out more data that affects those constituents, right? So I wouldn't necessarily expect this person to be a plant biologist, but I do expect them to have the area expertise to find these people and have those contacts, those points of contact that can advise them to make the best, decisions based on those areas that have the critical issues. So if we have an invasive species of, like, I don't know, cheeseweed in one area, but then you have whatever, weevils in another, they need to be able to identify those. Because I see a lot of that. A lot of times, a lot is put on the USDA currently, and they're stretched very thin. And they have to be willing to find people who are experts in those areas. So, but I do agree to the earlier sentiment that I don't want to pigeonhole this towards a checklist. I think you're going to leave out a lot of people who actually are really qualified.
I think those are all great points.
Also, these will be good questions when you are interviewing. They'll be able to expand on these different ideas and give us a real feel for how they would be the director or deputy.
So from that, I was able to kind of just write something and we can see how we feel about that. I was trying to get everything in without it being super duper wordy, but still a little wordy. So as a part of or in addition to the 5 years of administrative experience, director and deputy directors must be willing to research both issues, threats, and solutions to the agricultural sector, attend continuing education to further their knowledge, and collaborate with experts in the community to address issues.
Sounds good.
Did that encompass everything for everyone?
I liked it. Sounded good.
I'm just thinking about the placement of it. Does it go in that important of a line, or is it something that goes below that?
I think that's a pretty important, attribute for these positions. And, all of this will have to get, reworded and stuff again, I'm sure, when it goes through OCS. So it probably won't be in this order when we get to the end version, but being able to put these things forward to the community to get their feedback, to see if that's also how they feel, that they feel that these are important qualities, that they feel like what we're asking isn't too much or too little. That's going to be super important too. So is there other attributes or qualifications or anything that anybody else came up with over the 2 weeks or are seeing now? Debbie, I'd like to get your feedback a little bit because, you know, you're with Maui Economic Opportunity and you guys work with a lot of businesses and applicants and have a lot of experience in this field. So one of the concerns is that we didn't want to make it so restrictive that we lose out on a lot of applicants, but making sure that we get people that are really qualified because this is such an important endeavor. So that they have a really good grasp of what's going on and have the qualifications to really run the department well. The way we have it worded right now, do you think that is too restrictive, or do you feel like it's open enough to still get a nice pool of qualified applicants?
One thing you could do, which is kind of a catch-all, is you could say, you know, or equivalent education and experience. And then it kind of leaves a little bit of wiggle room so that if you have somebody that's not exactly the same fit, you can use a little discretion in interpreting that person may be a good fit, because you're correct. If you make it so specific, may limit your talent pool. So if you make it a little broader, that may give you a little bit more options.
So for the, you mean like this one down in the 3 years with at least 60%, instead of doing the 3 years of experience, say, must have education experience, or what was the other one?
You could say, or equivalent education and experience. And so like if you're applying for a state job, typically the state will look at 2 years of direct experience for an education or vice versa. So it just gives you a little more flexibility.
Okay. How does that sound?
Very good.
Yep, good.
So then even if they don't have necessarily 3 years of specific work experience in these, if they have some education or equivalent work experience, then it would be okay. Okay, sorry, one more, what time? So must have 3 years of experience, education, or equivalent work experience?
Sorry, you could say 3 years of experience, you say, or education and equivalent experience or something like that. So like maybe they have like a master's degree in a relevant field, but they don't have all the experience, then, you know, you could determine if that's an equivalent. Or maybe they don't have a bachelor's degree, if that's what you're looking for, but they do have, you know, experience. So
Okay, so at least 3 years of a direct experience, education, or equivalent work experience, at least 60% of the following functions.
yeah, I just don't know if you want to say 60%, and that you might want to just leave that out in terms of the amount of experience, you know, to quantify it at 60%, that's pretty restrictive. So that it just depends on what you're looking for, but that could limit your, yeah, as Lorena is saying, how about it's saying the majority instead of 60%. You know, instead of putting a number on it, just say majority.
Okay. How does everybody feel about that? Oh, chat.
Good.
Yeah, we did discuss the 60% last time because we were feeling like it was getting to be a little too restrictive, but then we went through and had people count how many they actually personally had experience with. And the smallest number we got was 4 out of these. And the highest number we got was 8, with the average being around 6 of these. So that's why we went with 60%. So we can change it to majority if everybody agrees to that. That would still mean that they would have to have at least half of these. Sorry, we've got a lot of folks with no cameras on, so speaking up helps.
And I'm sure the county's personnel services, they're gonna have their own language that they use as standard, so they're gonna, you know, but at least they can see what we're trying to achieve.
Let's see. Does anybody else have any feedback on that or oppose changing it from 60% to the majority? Okay, so I didn't hear any opposition, so we'll change it to the majority. So how are we feeling about this so far? I feel like these are really great things to look for in applicants. I feel like we're asking to be pretty thorough and asking for a good amount of experience. We're specifying that some of the experience needs to be in Hawaii, which was a big concern, making sure that the person, you know, was here long enough or had lived here long enough or was from here so that they understood the systems here and the issues here without using any language that would qualify for discrimination. So that's important.
You know, in civil service rules, are they allowed to say that they have to have experience in the state?
I believe they are. You just can't say you have to live in the state.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, technically, we're not discriminating against anybody if they have the knowledge of the food systems in Hawaii. But it makes it a little bit harder for people that don't live here to apply.
Which I think is great because it's possible that maybe our dream applicant, you know, is from here, but lives on the mainland and is looking for a reason to come back and be with family or whatnot, you know, and could apply. So I think that it leaves it open for some good possibilities.
Yeah, I think there's so many qualified people in Hawaii that could apply for these jobs, and then folks that have maybe had to leave too and would like to come back. It leaves the door open. Okay, so are we feeling like the qualifications we're good on those? Do we want to spend a little bit more time or have any more discussion on them, or should we move on to proposed reporting requirements? Do we want to go through them one more time?
Looks good.
Okay. All right, awesome job. Okay, so now this one, normally it just, in the charter, it just says they're responsible for reporting to the mayor and the council. So to ensure that the department is on track with what the community wants, I think we could be a little bit more specific on what we're asking them to report. And also, like, you know, how they plan so that they can report on those things and what kind of benchmarks we would like to see data being collected, you know, through the county at a countywide level. So these are just kind of some examples that I pulled from the code of things that they report on. So status reports, like on the implementation and enforcement of community plans, you know, when they're submitted, action elements, So identifying specific programs, projects, or regulations that need to be developed. Implementation, so like schedules, the financial element, and then also like milestones, how they're achieving these milestones throughout the year, and then a status report of projects that are ongoing. So I just pulled these up to kind of give us some ideas of what it would be possible, and then kind of put down here some like suggestions I was thinking of, like, you know, labor demographics. So the number of jobs that are created each year or maintained each year, the pay associated with those jobs, the age of workers, the amount of land and ag valuation and dedication versus not being utilized, number of farms, the amount of grants distributed, you know, the impacts from those. So these are kind of things that I was just suggesting. And we can start, you know, doing a brain dump to get more of these things down and then kind of work them like we do.
Hi, Jennifer, this is Kenneth. When I was the ag specialist for the county in our economic development office, every single year, you have to go through this reporting issue, and over time, they develop what measures for your specific job, or, you know, because I had to take care of the ag park, so I had to provide that kind of data. But if you look at the budget, like last year's budget, not the one that was just passed, but every department has these reporting sheets, and they tell you for maybe 3 or 4 years what they've been able to accomplish.
Mhm.
It's just that this would have to be specific for the ag department.
Yes, it would have to be specific for the ag department. And kind of from what I saw when we would see those reports from the departments is, you know, some were detailed and others were very, very broad, and the benchmarks and things were so broad and broadly worded that you really couldn't measure much with them. So trying to avoid that so that we know that we're, you know, actually making impacts and meeting goals and benchmarks, because this is such a huge sector to develop. I think it's always good to be more specific with benchmarks to where you can actually get metrics and data from that and see the progression or where your gaps are. What do you think?
Only the last year that I was working did they allow us to make some changes in what, you know, we would list.
And what did
So
you list? What were the changes? Do you remember? Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot.
A lot of mine was related to the ag park, the number of lots being used, income level, you know, like for the whole park. You had to give an estimate, like, so you could see whether we're maintaining or going down, or, you know. But like I say, I was only one part of the office, so each staff member had their own suggested, you know, reporting items. Like the Karen Awakawa, who did a lot of business reports and had a lot of classes. Hers was easy because almost every week they had some type of presentation or at their office. So her job was a little easier because it was defined, but she could change what she wanted to do within a year, what kind of classes.
Okay.
Now, the OED office, we had to take care of a grant in Kihei. They have that facility that they produced the Maui data book.
Yeah.
And then, but it's like I think it's 2 years behind the actual year. But there's also a state data book. So I don't know if we need to go into all these things because it's already being done technically. And I couldn't tell you how the Maui County data book people get their information.
A lot of
But-
it comes from the USDA and other census. That's what they quote in the beginning.
Yeah, so, but it's already being done in a sense, I'm telling you, that there is a Maui County data book.
Yeah, it is. I think, you know, when we've looked at that information, there's just so many gaps because it's really broad. And so I think that's great and they're going to continue to do that. But if we can get a little bit more detailed on the information we want for the county specific, especially like it's going to let us know, you know, what areas are going to need more funding, which areas are starting to level out, which areas are like, you know, severely hurting, where we need to prioritize like our plans and things like that at the county level, especially because we have, you know, 4 islands. So I think, you know, finding ways to not duplicate what they're doing, but make it more detailed maybe.
Yeah, this is Shay again. Totally agree. I was actually working on, just from the point of view of workforce development, when I was working with Linda Pupolo last spring, just to do a federal, I forget what it was called, a local plan, but we were trying to figure out how many jobs, you know, were created through agriculture. And I went to the county data book and it was just, there just wasn't information that was really helpful. I mean, it was just too old and it was too limited. And then, you know, other research that I've done recently where I was trying to figure out, you know, how much different sort of average water uses and farm production, it's just really hard to find that information. So to me, this is definitely a full-time job to gather all this data, but it's super important. And really it needs to be as much in real time as possible, which obviously is a huge, a huge endeavor, but that's the only way you're going to really be able to respond to things, I think.
So yeah, I think the data collection part is definitely going to be a large undertaking because we have such large gaps in the data, just because it has been, you know, so understaffed for so long at the county level. But just, you know, making sure that we have some really good ideas to put forward. And I've been pulling them out of chat. So Bobby recommended farms by size, irrigated land, and types of farm. And then Debbie put forward types of crops and crop yield.
Hi, Jennifer, it's Teresa.
Hi.
Hi, everybody. Ranches, size of ranch, how many head of cattle? I was thinking what kind of invasive species we all have bothering us and how many acres of it or how many deer or how many acres of you know, all that fireweed or wattle or much we've removed this year. Or how much fencing you've done in a year. All your improvements, something like that also.
Okay, value crop, wholesale, retail. So I think we will get into kind of 2 types of reporting. So as I'm seeing these, there's going to be the larger report that the department will have to deliver to the council to say, hey, this is how much money we've got. This is what we've been able to do. This is how we're making progress. And then there's going to be data collection that, yes, needs to be reported on, but maybe not in the same manner, and a continual tracking. Do you guys think that they're, you know, are you guys seeing those 2 different levels of reporting and data collection? Or are you thinking this all would be every year reported to the council?
Those are two different distinctly things. Data collection, statistics, analytics, those are all different. You could come up with an infinite list of items, but if you don't collect the data to support it, isn't going to be useful. So you want to report on your successes and your budgetary run rate, but in terms of a database and analytics, I think the department's going to have to figure out what it wants to start focusing on. And is it going to start spending its time measuring fences, or is it going to chase invasive species, or is it going to try and do crop yield? So you got to get the data for all of those and then start reporting. I would also recommend that leveraging, because CTAR has a whole bunch of invasive data. Other groups have a lot of data. Department of USDA has a lot of data. Department of Agriculture of Hawaii has a lot of data. So you want to be able to collect what's available and then bring it up to speed, and then add it into it as you've seen the gaps.
So if we're thinking on a broader scale, would we want to see like resident satisfaction with the department's actions? Like, do we want to get feedback on that kind of thing?
All the above, yes.
Debbie raised your hand. Go ahead, Debbie.
Yeah, I just had a question. So who's gonna be collecting the data? Is the farmers? Because dealing with some of the farm projects that we've had through the Senior Farmers Nutrition Market program, and even from the micro ag program, I think for some of them, they just don't have the capacity to give this detailed information. So I just want to make sure, I mean, I think it's all needed, but I just want to make sure that we're not imposing things on people that they're not going to be able to deliver, then thereby discouraging them from benefiting from whatever the department can offer. So just my comments. Thank you.
No, I think that's a great point. When we talked about the areas of need and put out the survey, research and development was a huge thing that, needed to be done within the department, but then also making sure that research and development division, or whatever they call it, is reaching out to these existing organizations that are already tracking some of this data. So not to duplicate their work, but maybe to compile it in a more comprehensive manner at the county level. So that's kind of what we had kind of discussed as a group, seeing happening, so that the county is not taking on every single thing and getting all this information and duplicating the efforts that are already being done. But it is compiling this and making it more comprehensive, and finding where the gaps are in that data collection between the different agencies as well. Did that answer your question? Okay.
The key to this is data-driven decisions. So we've got to be able to get the data one way or the other. And like Debbie says, the farmers are farming and other people are doing their job. So we're going to have to find ways to collect the data or get data, or if it's not going to be instantaneous. So we're going to have to find out ways to monitor and even extrapolate data. So it's going to be a huge IT project. Again, my opinion of just writing a long list of things that we want to report on, I think it's the strategic direction of the director to put the ideas of what he wants to be measured on in the first 2 or 3 years, and collect that data appropriately.
Yeah. Jamie and Nathan, or Nate, sorry, not Nathan. Do you guys have any suggestions for like Molokai perspective, like the Sister Island perspective?
I think most of these things on here are pretty spot on. I do agree there's probably going to be some sense of trying to collect the data might be a little bit challenging at times for some, but I think that this is moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I'd second that too. I don't like the idea of getting too far into the details. The way I kind of perceive the county and the responsibility is, how do we impact growers, ranchers, producers, and how do we impact them? Is it positive? Do we move the needle in the correct way, or do we regress, right? And I think that would be easy, because like as me as a grower, if the county impacts me in a positive way, I'm going to want to share that with others. And, that's going to be an easy metric for me to share. I could say, well, because of X, I improved my production value by 10%, right? So that's to me, that's an easy metric. But when you start going into how much it's worth and how many acres, because that stuff changes by the month for some growers, right? So I don't want the county, I don't want this person to have to bite off way more than they can chew, but I do think it's important to capture, how we're impacting, if it's positive or negative.
Yeah, I do think so. I think, the satisfaction and positive and negative impacts are super important, because we want to make sure that, they're meeting these needs, and that they're doing the job of making the community more happy and more satisfied, and, filling those needs rather than creating more hurdles or barriers. Teresa?
Jennifer, my thought for tracking invasive species was to see in case we could get our grant writer could write grants for us to help eliminate them. I don't know, get the Boy Scouts out, pull fireweed. I don't know, anybody.
Yeah, I think that's, okay. Yeah, I think that's super important. So invasive species tracking, I didn't get all of the things that you rattled off. I just made it broad. Is that okay?
Yeah,
For
that's
now?
fine.
Okay.
That's great. I was just hoping someday we could get our grant writer to write us little grants and get us some help. Or,
Yeah.
community volunteers or whatever, whoever wants to come out and pull or chop or whatever we do. Thanks.
Okay. Should we track the amount of funding, outside funding coming in through the department, so that we can show, the department was able to secure this much in outside funding, as opposed to before we were getting, this, so that we can show that they're actually out there doing the work to secure more funding and funneling that to the county. Sorry, I got some chats. Absolutely, and yes. Okay.
What's all that lines?
Uncle Bobby's gonna draw us a picture. We're gonna play charades, you guys. What is it? Uncle Bobby, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
No, I'm farting around over here with my phone and stuff. But
Were you trying to write something?
yeah, I was trying to, but trying to figure this out. I think definitely we got to report on the funding. I mean, like that's like major important. I mean, because this whole effort is going to take major funding, and like we're going to have limited resources, I know already. So let's put it where we can leverage those resources in the most productive way. And funding, we gotta really specialize in that area of funding, going after like federal funds, creating like even a private funding foundation. But in my opinion, the funding, we got to really address that, because before we can get almost anywhere, I mean, yeah, we got a plan, but everything's going to take funding. So I think that we got to leverage our resources in that area for sure. And I think that as we make it an issue to get the community, get the knowledge out there to the community, and let them know exactly how we're progressing. Because, you know, what's really important is that, of course, we all know that we got to get groundswell from the community. So engaging with the community and getting information out to them is going to be real important because we need their support.
So on that, do we want to put anything about education efforts?
In my opinion, definitely. We're going to have to educate the community. I think that's a big part that's lacking right now.
What about the tracking of food safety and market regulations? Is that something that we want to track so that, you know, maybe that might help our legislators get a better idea of how many stipulations they're putting on growers and what the repercussions of those are? I got Jamie said yes.
Jennifer, this is Kenneth.
Yes.
Isn't a lot of safety things possibly is coming down from either the federal government or the Hawaii Department of Ag, or the Health Department, I should say? So, because we don't really make those laws, right?
Correct. We don't make those laws, but they do impact us. And a lot of the times they negatively affect our agricultural sector, both the farmers, suppliers, producers, the distribution channels, and things. And so I think a lot of the legislators are not really aware of how many of these regulations are coming down the pipeline and how they impact the agricultural sector. And so if we're going to start kind of finding ways to mitigate those negative impacts, it might be wise to track them and start tracking the impacts so that, you know, if a regulation gets put into place and then we start to see farm, you know, production drop significantly within that year, there can be a correlation to those regulations. And then that is something that a department could go and lobby at the state and federal level to say, hey, this regulation is significantly impacting our agricultural sector and we have the data to prove it. You guys need to provide an exemption or provide some kind of resources to mitigate those negative impacts if this is something that you're going to continue regulating.
But I think Hawaii's production is like a small little dot compared to some states like California. So no matter how significant it is for our farmers, is it the same for their farmers, which are much bigger, you know, as far as volume and you know, economics? I mean, Hawaii is a drop in the bucket.
It is a drop in the bucket, but each state has some kind of autonomy and ability to say, like, yes, this is a regulation that came down. However, it's causing us problems and finding ways to mitigate that. So each state can have exemptions from these regulations or different ways to mitigate it, or you can ask for more funding to combat those impacts too. But if you don't track it, it's really hard to have that argument to be able to lobby on behalf of the community for those changes.
Part of your education effort that is not in place is you need to be educating the legislature.
Yeah, that's easier said than done, but
but that's where it's not the public, it's the people that are funding things.
no, exactly. Absolutely. You know, a lot of the times, and, you know, I don't think it's malicious even, you know, they're just hearing, you know, one side of the story about how something is negatively impacting something else. And they go, oh, that sounds horrible. Let's make a rule to avoid that. But they don't think about the other side of that rule and how it impacts, you know, the food channels and things like that. Jerry?
Yeah, I think Kenneth is right that you know, we're a drop in the bucket, and then even a lot of the farms on in Maui County are comparatively small. So it's been my experience of trying to talk to common sense to legislators who are trying to enact the Food Safety and Modernization Act. You know, when I wrote letters to federal legislators, some of whom were actually from Hawaii, believe it or not, and they said, you guys, this is really going to kill us. You know, this is really hard to implement. And they just didn't seem to really care. And I think it's because most of those regulations have been written for really big farms. We just don't really have much say in that. And I'm not sure that the county can make exemptions or the state can make exemptions. It has to be whether or not the feds allow an exemption based upon farm size or sales or things like that. I think we get an insensitive ear is what I'm trying to say.
Mhm.
I agree with you, but I got to tell you, I mean, we got the exemption for Kalo from FSMA, right? So, I mean, there is an opportunity if there's enough voices that speak up and we have the data that shows it, there is an opportunity for possibility. And yes, it does come down from a federal level, but there is an opportunity where they will make exemptions in some of this food safety stuff. I've seen it happen. I've been working really closely with all of it, and you just have to, you've got to have the people show up and have a consensus of what that is and have that data to show it. That's how they did the Kalo exemption, for example.
Well, that's cool.
Okay, so is there a reporting benchmark that we could put for, how would we say, like education of legislators or lobbying at the state and federal level or something like that, so that we know the department is actually going to go and have those conversations on behalf of our ag sector, so that it's not really falling on the burden of the farmer that has to take the time off and fly into Oahu or fly to go meet their congressperson to do that. Is that something that we would like to have in a report annually?
I would. I definitely would want to see that kind of information. Because in my opinion, if we don't start a political action, lobbying, whatever, I mean, because if we're going to impact agriculture, let's just say on a whole, we got to change some laws. So we better have a group that's focusing over there on the state level. Definitely, because like Jerry said, on the federal level, because we're such, in the eyes of the mainland, we're just so small producers that we don't have that influence. We don't have that leverage to enact and change federal laws. But on the state level, we should at least be doing that. We definitely should at least have some kind of political action committee, whatever, and that's promoting what we're trying to achieve and then reporting back to the community. Because like what I said is that we got to create community groundswell. If we want things to change in Hawaii, we need the community behind us. And that's going to be through education and legislation. And of course, collaboration. But to me, that's very, very important. That's like totally important. The legislative lobbying, the funding, because without that, we're going to have a hard time in Hawaii as far as agriculture goes. I mean, look at the important ag lands decreed. You know what I mean? We're not even following those laws. That's like state laws. I mean, I would think that a big issue and a big push would be to address that, because when you look at the benefits for the important ag lands, and I'm just talking for farmers, sorry, it's just huge. It's just tremendous. It'll help farming, agricultural activities just skyrocket if we could just push that at the legislative arena. So yeah, I'm all for that, big time, totally.
Jerry, you've got your hand up again. No.
No, I'm good.
You're good? Okay. So how are we feeling about these so far? That's quite a
Like,
bit to
I think
report
tack
on.
I think to
Go ahead.
tack on to what Robert was just saying too. So when we talk about public action, I think a lot of this has to do with a lot of growers and producers and ranchers don't know what legislation is in the pipeline, and that maybe they should be submitting testimony.
Hmm.
So the education piece absolutely could be, these bills are on the table. If you want to submit testimony, these are your timeframes, and that's a fairly simple one. But I know a lot of people who just can't keep track of that stuff, right? And a lot of times when you submit testimony, you may only have 12 hours or 24 hours to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially during the state legislative session, that stuff comes fast, hard, and quick, and then there's changes, and expecting the
It
average
is
person
part of
to
that.
keep up
The
with it is
education piece
crazy.
is helping people craft that testimony, right? Honestly, a lot of times I don't think the legislators even read that, right? They just look yay or nay if you're for or against. So you need to make sure that that's submitted, but also having the opportunity to submit physical testimony. A lot of times there might be a particular sector that it's super important for them to actually be there. So just that, to me, that education piece is important to share with all the growers, producers, ranchers, and everyone that's affected.
Yeah, I think that is a really good thing, and if we include that in part of the tracking, that means that the department would have to put effort into doing that, which is something that I think we've discussed multiple times as being something really, really needed throughout the ag sector. What about like infrastructure? We got some of like the ag and the irrigation farms, but what about like commercial kitchens or processing and distribution facilities? Is that something that we want to track to make sure that we're actually increasing those things?
That would be good data. And also, how well are they being used? Who's utilizing it? Are they being utilized? Or do we need more?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a big one. Like for here on Molokai, there's dedicated state land for ag use, but it's all tied up. And keeping track of when things become available, or how to get your hat in the ring, or even if you do already have a lease, are you using all of it or part of it? Can you sub out part of it? That's going to be a piece of that.
Sorry, I can only spell like half the time, so. All right.
So since I'm not driving, I can actually look at the screen and see some of the things that we put down here. A bunch of this is going to be compiled by National, National Agricultural.
Not sure where the sound is coming from. Hold on, it's hard to hear you, Sherry. Can you try speaking up a little bit louder, maybe?
Sure, I can try that. I am using my phone, so it's a little funky, but I might switch to the computer. But anyways, a bunch of the stuff like labor demographics, the number of farms, etc. I think those are compiled by NASS, and I think there used to also be a state statistical survey as well. So we wouldn't necessarily want to reproduce that, but feed into that. And then when we have ag land in valuation, ag land in dedication, I think there's a third category that RPT has, which is ag and conservation. might be worthwhile adding. And as a question for Teresa, as our resident rancher, the number of livestock, that's like asking how much money you have in the bank. That's sort of a personal question. So I don't know if how ranchers feel about saying how many sheep, goats, and cows they have.
Well, right now we have so many deer. I expect the ranchers are all going to be cutting their herds by 50% in the next year or two because there's no grass. And that's my point. I want to be able to document and have data, how much grass the deer are eating, how devastating they're just eating all the pastures. And in 5 years, we won't have any ranches. We'll have golf courses up there. All we gotta do is put in the pucas with the flag. No, maybe not too personal. I think it's just a number so we can see how we have to cut the herd. We used to have twice as many, and now we're going to cut it down to half of what we have now. It's crazy.
When the deer get through at the ranches, they're going to be on the farms, if not before.
Well, come claim your deer, okay? I saw some with your name on it. Come get those kids.
All right, I can't wait.
Is some of that data gathered already by the USDA? I know they do all kinds of surveys already. And I'm sorry I missed the earlier part of the conversation. Just want to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts with data that's already being gathered, because I know that it's kind of burdensome on ranchers and farmers to have to be constantly asking, answering these surveys, even the ones that already exist from the from the USDA. So
yes, multiple government agencies already collect a lot of data, and they have places to import that data into your own database. So it wouldn't be recollecting the data, it'd just be sucking the data down.
Okay.
So we can actually kind of highlight these because this is already being tracked. Yeah. And maybe this one too. And this would be kind of like the collating of this data to put into a report for the community council and mayor. Okay, wait, in the chat. What about data on farmers themselves, new farmers, farmers retiring, etc.? So I just put in labor demographics, number of jobs, pay, age of workers. I didn't specify farmers necessarily. Because it could be that data like across, or we could put in types of jobs so that we get that, whether they're farmers, whether they're ranchers, whether they're a worker in an agricultural related industry, or things like that, the pay and then the age. Does that work? We're just looking at a loss of knowledge. Do we know how many farmers currently participate in the current surveys? So I think it just
that data is available through How Ag Statistics.
Okay.
But it's good to present it to the legislators.
Yeah. So I think there's kind of like some discrepancy on like how many farmers there are and how many are actually like reporting. So we have like a like a good baseline number of farmers right now, but I wouldn't say that all farmers report, and I don't know what the percentage of that is or how you get it if you don't know who's reporting it.
Some of it is really actually for us, just because of the size of our farm, is difficult to report. Like they want to know how many pounds of beets you produce, and they put it into acres. Well, that's kind of outside of our range. So we're a much smaller producer than that, and so we're kind of loath to fill those in because we have like 25 or 30 different crops, and trying to parse them into sizes, on a per acre basis and stuff like that is a pain in the ass.
So, coming up as we go through this process, coming up with suggestions on how we would like to see those questions worded so that they actually make sense for people to fill them in is going to be something that's important. So thinking about that, especially those of you folks that do diversified farming, and you're like, I'm not going to go through and count each individual plant and how much it puts out and things like that. Is there an alternative question that maybe we can suggest to the department for their reporting processes? We don't have to do it right now, but thinking about how we can help them word those things so that the data makes more sense and the reporting process makes more sense, because that's hard to come up with those questions and know everybody's situation, right, and come up with the verbiage that fits all the different situations is difficult.
Jennifer, I'd just like to suggest that when we deal with small acre, we do want to know what they're producing food wise, but what's more encouraging to people getting into the idea of farming is how much per acre is being made. And successful small acreage farms in Hawaii produce a lot more per acre than on the mainland because of the ability to turn the crop multiple times or grow multiple times in a season. So that I just wanted to add that before we get away from it.
Okay, so crop yield slash, or we can put it down below. How would you?
Dollars per acre.
Okay.
Gross and net.
Jennifer, by the time we start getting around to these surveys, there might be some more automated ways of collecting this data instead of asking a farmer to go off and use a check mark box paper. I'll just put that out that there's lots of ways to automate this.
Yeah.
So I think the director should look into not only working with what the data that the people have and how they want to give it, but also are there other ways to collect it that helps them in their whole business.
Yeah, and incentivizing it.
Right.
That's I think incentivizing, people offering their information is really important because it's taking time out their day for things that are really needed, and that's not always in the forefront of people's minds when they've got 80 things on their checklist to do that day. Right. So, okay, so how are we feeling about this list so far? Debbie, can I ask you one more question? What would be a good way to track like the number of industries or emerging industries? Is that, we just say it like that?
Trying to unmute myself, sorry, and I can't get my video on. I'm having technical difficulties, sorry. So ask the question again, please.
So like as we start growing our ag sector, how could we word a benchmark to track like new and emerging industries versus what currently exists? Is there like specific language, or would that be?
Perhaps we just say it that way.
Okay. Okay. All right. So we've got any more from anybody, or is this looking pretty comprehensive? How are we feeling about it? So the highlighted ones, I was kind of putting it into a thing because it could be, this information could be gathered from various sources and just collated by the department to report on. And then the other ones would kind of be things that they would have to go out and do the research on. Jerry? Did you raise your hand or? All right, how are we? We're feeling good? There's no more suggestions? You guys are trying to get out of here super early. I like it. Hold on. We got to chat. And then William said, yes, the data is usually a couple years behind.
Yeah. Jennifer, this is Kenneth.
Yes.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
You're just saying number of farms. How do you define farm? Okay, now the next item you say is farm by size. So if you're just a subsistence farmer, are you going to be part of this?
Yeah, I think tracking the number of farms total is important, and then you can further see by the size.
Here's the deal. USDA uses that $1,000, figure to track if you're a farmer or not a farmer, because a lot of times, in order to qualify, you have to be a legal size farm. Otherwise, you don't get the benefits of, and they also, USDA, they utilize, if you could have made $1,000, but they had to have something in order to say, okay, you're a legal farmer, you can qualify for farm assistance to some kind of program. But if you're too small, you're not going to get that kind of assistance. Now, it'd be good to track that, but I'm just saying, there is a reason why USDA had to develop what is a farm by size, and they're using just the income level.
Okay. I think, to be honest, especially, with the rise in economic instability globally and, climate change and weather incidents and things, tracking the number of farms and then also the type of farms. So, if we see an increase in subsistence farms, that means that we're seeing an increase in actual food security too. So it may not be commercial or, spurring the economy the same way, but we can also track our food security that way too, which is also something that I think is important. But let me know what you guys think.
I think, Jennifer, you're right. I mean, especially for the island of Molokai, we have a ton of quote unquote farmers that are subsistence farmers that are really adding to the value of our food security of the island, but they wouldn't necessarily be, they're not commercial farmers, but they are farmers and they have farms. So, collecting that data, I think, is really valuable when we're looking at food sovereignty and food security for our islands.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sure Lanai is probably in the same boat. Yeah, a lot of people are growing their own stuff. And, if we're seeing an increase in subsistence farming on those two islands, that means, whether or not we're seeing a huge change in the economics in those areas, we're still seeing like an increase in the security or food security there, So I agree. I think it's important.
Jennifer?
Yeah.
According to the IAASTD, and I can't remember what that means, but I can always find it here on the internet. According to this International Agriculture Organization, they said over 60% of the food on the planet is grown on 1 to 2 hectare plots globally. So I think what we're hearing about Molokai and what we're seeing as things start to grow out here, that's a really important sector and needs a lot of support. And with the amount of money that can be made on 1 acre in Maui, partnering up some different 1 and 2 hectare areas is going to be financially viable.
Are you saying acres or hectares?
Hectares.
Okay.
Hectares about 2.5 acres. I'll send you that report.
Okay, and then we had another one added, volume of compost produced and waste diverted. I think that's a really good one. Do we want to track imports and exports under this collated stuff, you know, from other places? So we can see on a county level how that moves. Or do we not think that's a need? Okay. I didn't hear anybody, so, okay, so this is what we've got so far: ag evaluation, dedication, conservation, amount of grants dispersed, ag park demographics, and then the data that would be pulled in from other agencies and collated at the county level: labor demographics, number of farms, farm by size, irrigated land, types of farms, types of crops, crop yield, dollars per acre, number of ranches, number of livestock, value of crop, wholesale and retail. And then back at the county level, infrastructure, so number of commercial kitchens, processing, distribution facilities, who's using and what's needed, volume of compost produced and waste diverted, invasive species tracking, resident satisfaction with the department, outside funding sources and amounts, education outreach efforts, including legislative tracking and calls for testimony, tracking food safety and market and other regulations and the impacts, political action taken on behalf of the community, and number of industries, new and emergency and emerging.
Jennifer, it's Teresa.
Okay.
I was wondering, would it be useful to track water, how much water we use? Then we could justify to the county, we need more storage.
Like agricultural water use, they do track at the water department. Do we want to add this in here to pull that all in?
Well, yes. Our agricultural water, because they always make us cut back, and you can't tell the cows you can't have water today. Sorry, girls. We can't cut back water.
Yeah.
Stop washing the cars, but that's it.
That's actually a real good one because back in the day, the county had protection for farmers and ranchers where they didn't really have to cut back during drought times. I mean, let's get really, really bad, but they would begin with, first of all, no washing cars, no watering lawns, things like that, so that there would be water for crops and whatnot. And now they just make us all cut back. And when you eat vegetables, you can cut back, but then that cuts into your profit margin. And when you eat livestock, you cannot just cut back. I mean, who are you going to sell your cows to? They are under the same restrictions also. So they're not going to take in any more animals. So it is really critical to have like a drought water plan for agriculture. It's been talked about a lot, and then, you know, over the years, it's been just totally neglected. Like farmers are nothing.
Debbie put in the comments she thought of that also, but thinks it might be hard to track. But I think that the water department already tracks that. I've seen that in the what up. They are tracking the agricultural water use and the projected agricultural water use. So I think it wouldn't be too hard to track. And then also you have the water permits because they get the different pricing for agricultural water. I think it's very doable.
A lot of data is real easy to get, and then you just analyze it the way you want it, how it's being used in agriculture or something else.
Okay.
So, Jennifer,
Yes.
yeah, the very first line about ag and dedication, etc.
Yes.
That should be available from RPT.
Okay, so I can add this into the collating.
I said it should be. I'm not sure that they actually have it together to do it, but it should be available.
I agree, it should be. I think it is. I'm pretty sure they have an
That's their
idea of
job.
all that.
That's their job.
Okay, how are we feeling about this list so far? Sorry, I'll scroll down so you guys can see it all. Do you have any more feedback, or we're thinking it looks good? Okay. Okay, so I will take this information, I'll take the director qualifications information and try to put it into a survey. And then at the next meeting, we'll go over the survey to make sure that we get the group approval before we send it out. And so that'll be the second community survey. And then after that, we will go through the first survey results and get into those a little bit more in depth. And then from these two surveys, we can take this information and start actually writing the code amendments based on the community feedback and getting that consensus, which is really cool. So that will conclude like the first part of this community working group. And then once we get that legislation drafted and handed over to Shane, then we can start on kind of looking at priority projects and impacts. So what we want to put into the strategic plan based on those areas of need. And we can propose those things and put that out to the community too. So that will be the next portion. Does anybody have any questions? I feel like we're doing really good and moving along and through this stuff. And you guys are all just so amazing with your ideas and feedback and collaboration, and the respect you guys show for each other is just phenomenal. I'm just, like really humbled and impressed by it. So if there's no feedback or questions, we're done at 6:41. Good job, you guys are awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing the evening with me and everybody. It's very much appreciated. As always, I'll stick around a little bit after the meeting if anybody has any questions, comments, or concerns. And I hope you all have a wonderful week. Thank you, Stacy, for joining us too. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks.
Good night, everybody.
All right, see y'all.
Night,
Night,
everyone.
cowboy.